Okay, welcome back to our study of the book of Proverbs. And I'll go ahead and get out of the way that you can find the handout for this lesson and all the lessons on our website, bellairchurchofchrist.org, under Media, Bible Class Material, and Proverbs will be there. And you can see all of the previous classes, previous videos on our YouTube channel. And if you can just go to the Wednesday night Bible study playlist, they'll all be there going back to the beginning of September. And for future episodes, for the last several classes until the end of November, every Wednesday night, these will be premiering at 7:30, and then will be available, of course, for your viewing anytime after that. So let's go ahead and jump in to our class for tonight, in which we are talking about the use of the tongue. So Proverbs itself has a breakdown in which in the first 9 chapters or so there is a exposition of the themes, and there are longer passages in which, from the perspective of a father, there is this general advice about what wisdom is, how to get wisdom, that sort of thing in chapters 1 to 9. And then from chapters 10 to the end of the book, basically, although there are some different sections that we talked about in the first class, basically, though, the latter half or latter part of the book of Proverbs are the specific nuggets of wisdom, specific statements, pieces of advice that are on topics ranging from the use of money to working, to friendship, to marriage. And so in a similar way, perhaps the material that we're using for this class started through the first 6 classes or so, talking about the big ideas behind wisdom and how to get it, what it is, why we live wisely, what results from living wisely. And then starting in our last class, and really for the next few classes, we are talking about specific applications, we might say, of wisdom. Tonight, talking about the way that we talk, our speech, and the use of our tongue. And the goals for this class are, 1, to show how we use our words, and the result of that is, in the language of Proverbs, either life or death. If we go back to our class schedule, you remember that a couple classes ago we saw how the way of life, the way of death is a huge theme in the book of Proverbs, and it's not simply talking about, okay, if you live wisely, you won't die, although that at times is being said. But more than that, Proverbs is speaking about 2 ways of living, 2 qualities of life. On one hand, the way of life which is full and blessed and has joy and peace in the knowledge of God and the fear of the Lord. And the other, which is a life of insecurity and a desire that is never fulfilled, and ultimately death. But again, more than simply dying, but an existence, and then even beyond, that is devoid of the blessedness that is available in the wisdom of God. And so tonight we want to see how the tongue contributes to that, either to that blessed quality of life or to that disastrous quality of life. And we also want to show that it is the heart that is the origin, the beginning, the source of everything that we say. And so to control our tongue, it starts before that and involves the changing, the shaping, the molding of our hearts. So that's what we hope to accomplish. And I want to begin by reading. We've tried to do that at some point in each lesson. And tonight we're going to start by just reading about 12 or 13 verses in Proverbs 26. So it'll take up 2 slides if you want to look at the screen. But in your Bibles, Proverbs 26, and we're just going to read 16 to 28. I think almost every verse in here, and definitely the overarching theme of these verses, is the use of the tongue. So we'll use this to kind of take in the language of the Proverbs, and then we'll refer back to this passage several times as we go throughout this lesson. So Proverbs 26, starting in verse 16. The sluggard, by the way, there had been several verses before this talking about the sluggard and his laziness, but the last statement about the sluggard talks about his use of his words. And then that transitions, it seems like, into the rest of this chapter. So Proverbs 26:16, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can give a discreet answer. Like one who takes a dog by the ears is he who passes by and meddles with strife not belonging to him. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, "Was I not joking?" For lack of wood the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, contention quiets down. Like charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they go down into the innermost parts of the body. Verse 23, like an earthen vessel overlaid with silver dross are burning lips and a wicked heart. He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred covers itself with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. He who digs a pit will fall into it. He who rolls a stone, it will come back on him. A lying tongue hates those who crushes, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Okay, in that passage, I think we see both the variety of ways that the tongue can be used, mostly misused, but also we see the power that is, and the destructive power, I think, in particular, of the tongue. And that's where we want to start, just by pointing out that the language of Proverbs is very strong and very clear, that there are huge implications in the way that we talk, the way that we use our words. And so we find the language of life and satisfaction, a tree of life, healing, being fed by the fruit. All of those are in association with the good uses of the tongue, or with good speech. And on the other side, you have death and a snare, a fleeting vapor, and a disastrous picture of the misuses of our speech. And that should strike us. And maybe we would ask the question, why use such forceful language to discuss the way speech works, our speech and the speech of others? And I think we could think about some things to be a little bit philosophical to begin. We have, sayings like, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, words may never hurt me." We try to tell ourselves that words don't really matter. We say, well, it's just words. And the Bible doesn't recognize that sort of thinking for the most part. And I think if we're honest and we really look at the way that our lives are and the way that the world works, we understand that words are incredibly powerful. Someone has said, words create worlds. And from a biblical perspective, the worlds were made. It was the Word of God that created everything. And it is true in our own way about our words. And you could think of a maybe somewhat trivial example, perhaps, of, you get a haircut and you're not sure about your haircut, whether it looks good, you're a little bit insecure about that. And you go out, first thing that next day, and you see somebody and they say, "Did you get a haircut? It looks great. I love what you did with your hair," something like that. That comment, those words that are spoken, then it changes our reality. Now we have confidence. Now we have, positivity about our image or something. And you could think of much more serious examples. In fact, in our epistles class on Monday night, someone gave the example of losing a loved one and a brother in Christ, coming to the hospital room as he was passing away and saying a prayer and speaking words that they still remember, still have so much power now. And so in that moment of grief and darkness, those words were a source of life and of comfort and of light. And we, I think, understand when we think about it that words make all the difference. And the Bible really, really drives that home. In fact, there may be some things about the Bible language or the Bible teaching that we might not understand. We need to think more about. I mean, think about the emphasis placed, for instance, in the Old Testament on blessing and cursing. Balaam stood up to curse Israel, and we might think, well, he's just speaking words. What's the big idea? What's the big deal if Balaam says these words of cursing towards Israel? But God wouldn't let him do it. He was protecting his people. There is power, we would say, in words. And we need to be honest about that, recognize that, and then think about it seriously. But to get back to Proverbs in terms of the practical ways why we would say that the tongue, the use of words is so important, we would see several things. And we won't look at each of these. Again, one of the benefits of having the handout is to be able to look more closely at these verses either ahead of time or after our study. But you see that for good or ill, right? Words can guard us. They can keep us out of trouble. 12 verse 13 talks about how you can either be ensnared or you can escape, depending on how you use your words. And so it matters. 27:19, like ointment or like a sweet perfume, so is counsel sweet to a friend. And so it changes, it improves our life and our relationships, or it can damage and destroy our life and relationships. And we'll talk about more of that as we go. But there's maybe something deeper than that, which is that there are these practical consequences for the way we use our words, but the language of Proverbs, the thinking of Proverbs as well as the rest of Scripture, as you see a couple New Testament examples here, is that the reason why our words are so important is because they are not just words. They are coming from the heart. They are coming from what is inside of us. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, or that which fills the heart comes out in our words. And James will point out that a freshwater fountain is going to put forth fresh water, and a saltwater fountain will put forth salt water. And so we speak what it is that is in our heart, and that's why they are, again, not just words. That's why when to use the language of Proverbs 26, someone says something hurtful and then says, "Well, I was just joking," why that doesn't really help. Because when we hear those hurtful words, even if the person, says they're joking or they said it in humor, we understand that words come from the heart. And so they have power, both for good and for ill. So let's start by talking about the misuses of the tongue, and then we'll talk about how we should be using our speech. But I'll give you a few here, and some of these I think are obvious. Obviously, lying is something that is advised against or condemned many times in Proverbs. That passage in chapter 19, in both verse 5 and verse 9, it's almost the same exact proverb. The idea of false witness, I thought about that a little bit. I mean, after all, the commandment in the Ten Commandments about not lying is actually phrased, "do not bear false witness." And that seems, or this language seems to have a legal connotation, but I wonder if we need to think more about lying versus telling the truth. That the idea is that our words are supposed to have credibility. They're supposed to be trustworthy. And yet when we lie about whatever it is, we are breaking that trustworthiness, breaking that credibility, and that will get us into trouble, if nothing else. Obviously, the quarreling, the whispering is mentioned. We saw that in chapter 26 that we read earlier. Kindling strife, saying things to get people riled up or pitted against one another. But notice also in that passage we read in chapter 26, there's this idea of someone who has hatred, but they disguise it with their lips. So it's not just speaking evil against other people, which we think of when we see slander or backbiting, but it's also hating someone or having ill will towards someone, but using our smooth words to cover that up and to manipulate them perhaps in some way. And so there is speaking ill, there is hypocritically manipulating somebody, as well as boasting, let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips, and in 27 verse 2. But there are other things as well. In chapter 11 verse 13, I think one that is important to keep in mind, he who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals a matter. So, even just saying things that are true, but they don't need to be spread. Other people don't need to know about them. A wise person understands not only confidentiality, but also has discernment to say, this is really not my place. It's not beneficial to say this thing to somebody else, to reveal this secret. So the Proverbs mentions that, stirring up anger, saying things again that will provoke other people. Chapter 29, verse 20, even just being hasty and not thinking through. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. And so when we are quick, we are thoughtless. That Proverbs puts in the category of being foolish with our tongue. So a lot of things in view, okay? It's not just lying. It's not just speaking hateful things. But it is being deceitful, it is being manipulative, it is trying to separate other people, trying to provoke a reaction. It is saying things that have no business being said to other people, talking about other people, gossiping, or just saying things rashly without thinking about it, or speaking good of ourselves in a boastful way. All of these things are misuses. And so the question would be, why? Why do we do this? And what do we gain from this? And that is what 21 verse 6 says. It talks about dishonest gain. And I think monetary gain is the sense of that verse and some of these other verses. But it struck me that really in various ways, not just money, but really a lot of what we do with our tongue, the misuse of our tongue, is to gain something, right? It may be money, it may be wealth, it may be advancement in some way, but even social gain, trying to bring honor to ourselves. And oftentimes you see 11 verse 9 and 12 verse 6 would be related as well. But 11 verse 9, with the mouth the godless man destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. Maybe a picture of tearing others down to lift ourselves up. Okay, and the proverb says the righteous person, he has confidence, he has knowledge that he'll be okay. But the foolish person, the dishonest person, is trying to bring other people down so that they can have more confidence, more security in their social standing. And that's a very real thing. And we do that, I think, a lot more than maybe we realize. But the way that we talk about other people and we want to highlight their flaws, we want to point out that they're not all that, or that they have these shortcomings that lower them in our own standing or in the standing of other people. And really that is just self-serving to make people, we think better about us. Although if we're in the habit of talking bad about other people, that really in the end makes us look worse than anything we're saying about others. But again, so it's monetary gain, it's the gain of honor or social status, it's pleasure or power. It's a very similar verse to what we read in verse 26, in chapter 26, but 18 verse 8, the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels that go down in the innermost parts of the body. So it just feels good. Feels good to say these things, to spread the latest news that we know about such and such person. Did you hear what this person did? Did you hear what happened to this person? That just feels good for whatever reason. It's selfish in the end. Maybe it makes us feel like we're in control, we're running the show. But it tastes good to get that and to hear it and to speak those dainty morsels, so to speak. And again, even the separating of friends, the causing of trouble, oftentimes we're doing that because it advances our own gain or our own ends in some way. That there's this political maneuvering of, we want to be valued more in the sight of somebody, and so we want to separate them from someone they're close to in order to feel like we have more of an in than anybody else. So in the end, it comes back to us and what it is that we gain. So the question would be, is it worth it? And I think you know that the answer is no, it's not worth it. But a couple things here that we would point out in Proverbs 20, verse 17. And think again about how it's not just monetary gain, though that's the focus of this verse, but any kind of gain. Think about that, dishonest or ill-gotten through our misuse of our words. 20 verse 17, bread obtained by falsehood is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be filled with gravel. Whatever we get from lying, from manipulating, from gossiping, from separating others, from causing trouble, whatever we get, whether we advance our careers, we get more wealth, we cheat somebody, or we get some popularity or some social honor, it's going to quickly turn to gravel. It's not secure. And pretty soon, if that's how we got that status, or that's how we got that friendship, or that's how we got that promotion, we, before anything, are going to feel insecure about that, or we're going to doubt it, and then we're only going to have to do more of that sort of manipulation to feel secure or to advance ourselves. It doesn't last. It's fleeting. It's a snare. Chapter 12, verse 19 talks about truth being forever, but lying is for a moment. You know the old adage about, it's better to tell the truth. You don't have to remember your lie. But when you kind of are always saying things that are stretching the truth or outright lying, you got to keep that up. And the truth is always something that you got to stay on your toes to say, oh well, this other thing is also true, or no, this is also the case. Maybe we would say it's just exhausting, but it's not permanent. It's not enduring as truth is. And then there's obviously punishment that we can incur, consequences of that calamity. And this being exposed, this goes back to the passage we read in chapter 26. And remember that in verse 27, right at the end of that, it says, he who digs a pit will fall into it. And that verse expressly it does not mention anything about the use of the tongue. But remember that whole passage was about that. And it was about the dishonest, the corrupt person that is trying to speak good things in order to cover up their hatred. And the proverb writer says, don't believe it, don't trust it for a moment. And it goes on to say that if you're causing trouble through lying, deception, manipulation, hypocrisy, it's going to get you. You're going to fall into the pit that you have dug for yourself. But then this section here in B4 on the back of your handout talks about the deeper problem. And there's this passage in 28 verse 5 that I think is insightful, where the proverb says, evil men do not, I think I got it wrong here. 28:25. Okay. An arrogant man stirs up strife, but he who trusts in the Lord will prosper. So why does a person use their words to deceive, to manipulate, to stir up something? It's really because, again, they're trusting in themselves and their own way of doing things to get security or gain or honor. And that's in opposition to what is one of the central themes of Proverbs, which is trusting in God to take care of us. Okay, I don't need to look good in front of other people. I don't need to separate other people to make myself feel better, look better. I don't need to manipulate things in my business to gain more. I need to just trust in God and know that He will take care of me. But on your handout, the first verse in that section is 4:23 and 24. And I just think it's important to read this and to think about again what we're saying when we say that the heart is really the beginning of this. The things that we say is because of what's in our heart. And so chapter 4, verse 23, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you. That's what we're trying to do. Watch over our heart diligently, carefully, so that we can use our words properly. Okay, and then that brings us to proper speech. And maybe we should have left more time for this to talk about the positive as opposed to the negative. But let's walk through here what you find in section C. And again, a lot of verses here, and we're just going to highlight a few of them. But the first and maybe most obvious thing is that we should be speaking truth. Chapter 12, verse 17, he who speaks truth tells what is right, but a false witness deceit. So again, before we speak, is it true? Is it factual? Or is it deceptive in some way? Is it a clear representation of reality? Or is it stretched or distorted or false in some way? That's maybe the most obvious test of our speech, but there are other things that the Proverbs is encouraging us to think about as well. Chapter 18, verse 13. You know, there's a lot of Proverbs like this. He who gives an answer before he hears is it is a folly and shame to him. Okay, are we listening first? Right? Are we really listening? You're familiar as well as I am that oftentimes in a conversation, when the other person is talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say rather than actually listening to what they have to say. But as we're listening, we are thinking, okay, is it right for me to speak here? Okay, what will the consequences be if I say something? Is this going to have a positive outcome? We'll talk about that at the end. But just that moment of pause, that moment of being quiet. By the way, that's okay. And I have tried to tell myself this over many years. It's okay to say nothing, either at all. It's okay to say nothing in the moment. It's okay to say, I need to think about this more. Okay. It's okay to sit on the email for a few days before you respond. It's okay to not text back right away or comment on Facebook right away. Because in Proverbs, the wise person is considering, thinking, and going through all the the permutations of what each response will bring about and what is the best thing for that situation. Okay, and so we're thinking, but when we do respond, we are responding with control. 15:1 is a famous proverb: a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So we've thought about it, we've considered, we've applied our wisdom and our discernment, thinking through the consequences. Then when we speak, we are self-controlled. Our impulses, the tone of our voice, the volume of our voice, our body language, everything is under control. It's calm, or at least it's calculated to what is right for that present moment. And to the language of Proverbs 15, it is gentle, soft, even-tempered answers that will be the best remedy for a contentious situation. Okay, but to that point, not only are we doing it in the right manner, but it's at the right time. So think about 25 verse 11. And actually, I'm going to read several verses here because I think this all fits together. 11 to 13. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his masters. Each of these is about something that is beautiful and that is fitting and that is refreshing. But our words can only be that if they fit the moment. Are they timely? Is it what the person needs? And again, I think all of us have probably benefited from someone who knew the right thing to say in that moment, and that is what we're striving for. But again, you can't get there without the rest of this, right? Without thinking, without listening, without considering, and without kind of having some control, as opposed to just losing control and our impulses driving us to say things that we realize later really wasn't the right time for that. And then we want it to be constructive. So again, several verses here, and the idea of building and of healing is central to each of these verses. But 16:24, just as a taste, pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Good words, words fitly spoken, another Proverbs phrase, words that are preceded by thinking and considering. Words bring life, sweetness, healing. They change people. They change their hearts. They change their minds. They affect them in this powerful way. We need to think about if our words are doing just that. Are they sweet to hear? Are they sweet to the soul? Are they healing? By the way, sometimes healing happens through something that's painful, right? So what we're saying here is that we're only ever saying things that are, pleasant and sweet and nothing that would ever be, difficult to hear or painful. We know that we need that, and others may need that at times, but we need to be implementing all of these things, even when we have to say something, and maybe especially when we have to say something that's going to hurt. It's going to be the honest truth that's going to perhaps bother this person. Even more important in those circumstances, to think, to listen, to consider, and then to be under control, to focus our energy and our efforts on saying the right thing at the right time in the right way. And if we do that, there are obviously wonderful results. We diffuse tense situations. We make peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. But that's that turning away of wrath. How wonderful would it be if all of us could walk into a contentious situation in our home, in our office, in the church, and know what to say in order to diffuse those difficult circumstances. And then there is the famous proverb in 17 verse 28. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. The kind of modern version of this is to say, better to be silent and be thought a fool than to speak and to confirm any doubts or something like that. But the proverb actually says that if you're silent, you'll be considered wise. People will notice, oh, he's thinking, he's contemplating. Okay. But to speak rashly is to reveal the folly within us. And so these are things to think about, and we'll maybe direct our discussion towards these things. But before we do that, just one more verse from the New Testament. Colossians 4 verse 6, let your speech always be gracious. So that's the manner of speaking as well as the content. Seasoned with salt, I think, is maybe to the appropriate, the timeliness, as well as the beauty and the flavor, so to speak, or the healing, preserving nature of our speech, so that you may know how to answer each person. And that gets to that each situation has a different answer. Each person has a different way of going about that. And we'll never understand that if we're not thinking first, considering and listening before we speak. Okay, so here's the discussion question, and just one. And if you're with other people, talk about this with your friends, with your family. And if you're by yourself, you can just think about this question. But here's the question: what can we do to proactively set ourselves up for using our words effectively? So as I'm thinking about this, it seems to me that one of the things that's most difficult about the use of our tongue is that these things happen in the moment. And so oftentimes we are reacting. We are reflexive in the way that we speak in a conversation. And so we don't know what to say, so we just say something. Or we feel awkward, so to speak. And so we tell a joke, or we make some kind of comment that later we realize wasn't appropriate. Or we get going, we get on a rant, and we just don't stop before we say something that we later regret. It's in the moment, and it is hard oftentimes to control ourselves in the moment. So the question is, thinking about the progression of the test, the questions we should go through. What can we do proactively? If it starts in the heart, and that's what we've talked about, we want to make sure we're speaking things that lead to life and not death. We want to make sure we're speaking things that are healing and constructive, as opposed to tearing people down or separating people. If that begins in the heart, if there's something that happens beforehand, then what habits can we develop? How can we train ourselves proactively to set ourselves up for successful, effective use of the tongue, as opposed to setting ourselves up for failure? So the class is over. But if you would like, spend a few minutes discussing this with those that are with you, and I'll go ahead and mute and show you this for several minutes, and you can join us next week for lesson 9 of our Proverbs class. Thank you so much for joining us.